The Guardian Legend, called Guardic Gaiden in Japan, was developed by Compile and published in North America in 1989. The game is a sequel to Guardic, released on the MSX in 1986 in Japan. It's an action-adventure shoot-'em-up game divided into a labyrinth and dungeons. The labyrinth is a more open-world part of the game, where the player controls the gianoid guardian of Earth, Miria, on the surface of the alien planet-like object Naju. This gameplay features exploration elements as players wander around finding weapon power-ups, new special weapons, and red lander chip quantity upgrades to strengthen their weapons. Along the way, there are also rooms with blue lander merchants and tips for the game's puzzles that usually revolve around gaining access to the game's shoot-'em-up dungeons that are spread out in different areas on Naju's surface. In the labyrinth, players can also find mini-bosses that are optional fights but usually drop useful items. These fights begin with an alarm sound and barriers moving to prevent retreat. The fights vary in difficulty. The game isn't so easy that most players will be able to get by with their default gun either. Using the special weapons appropriately, which also eat up chips as ammo, is key to a smooth gameplay experience. In fact, using the right weapons against the right enemies can make some of the boss and mini-boss fights laughably easy, assuming players have obtained those weapons before fighting the bosses. To enter dungeons, players usually need to do specific things. Sometimes it's as easy as shooting the entrances to gain access. Other times, you may have to just wait for a few minutes for the entrance to open up. The dungeons, or corridors as they're called in the game, are top-down scrolling shoot-'em-ups, and Miria can use the weapons and items she finds on Naju during these sections. They aren't particularly long, and they're very open with enemies being the only threats. There's no collision with walls or anything like that, and even many of the bullets are destructible. The screen can scroll really quickly at times and make these areas more exciting, which is also something the game didn't hesitate to stylistically show off early in its first dungeon, as even PCs at the time couldn't accomplish this like the NES could with its graphics coprocessor. Every dungeon ends with boss fights of varying difficulty. As rewards for conquering dungeons, players will either get a new power-up or a special warp access key that opens up new areas of Naju's labyrinths for exploration. The loop of exploration and dungeon diving continues in this manner until the game ends. A lot of people say this game is like Metroid, with how the world opens up, and like Zelda in the exploration perspective, but personally those two games didn't really come to mind when I played the game for the first time. The game just seemed more special and more unique to me. I do think the Guardian Legends world map was an innovation in 1989 though that even the original Metroid didn't have. The game's story is about Miria's journey to save the Earth by destroying Naju before it collides with the planet. To do this, she has to infiltrate Naju and activate 10 safety devices at the end of Naju's corridors to initialize the self-destruct mechanism. As weird as this sounds, I was thinking a lot about the Guardian Legend while I was playing Nier Automata for the first time years ago. Of course, the plot of Nier Automata goes in a completely different direction, but that game too has shoot-'em-up segments mixed in with mostly action RPG gameplay. In fact, both Nier Automata and the Guardian Legend begin with a shoot-'em-up segment before going into another style of gameplay. The point is that I have a thing for these kinds of science fiction stories in video games that capture the imagination. As a 7-year-old, this game had a lasting impression on me with its art design and gameplay, and that's probably most of the reason I still think about the game even to this day. The Guardian Legend did a lot of things well for its time and is a model example of an early good hybrid game. The art was a bit samey for the different sections of Naju, and many enemies were simple color palette swaps. As a 7-year-old, I was both fascinated and terrified by some of the dungeon boss designs. The game gave you good reasons to explore through the rewarding items and power-ups, which I think are more or less necessary to make the more difficult stages manageable. Finding the solutions to how to enter some of the later dungeons was reasonably satisfying too. And if you don't like exploring and just want to play a shoot-'em-up, the game also let you input the first letters of the game's English title, TGL, into the password field to play the game strictly as a shooter. I found this mode to be fun and challenging, but I've never personally beaten it in this mode, as I need the power-ups and items from the labyrinth to actually win the game. The TGL game mode is fun for a classic arcade experience though. Masatomo Miyamoto and Takeshi Santos composed the game's music and sounds. They're iconic even if they don't have the same legendary reputation as games like Mega Man and Castlevania do, and I can immediately recognize the game just from hearing alarm sounds and boss music. The music to the Guardian Legend has been remixed and reinterpreted many times over the past 35 years, and you can find some nice bops just doing some quick searches on Google or YouTube. While we're talking about fan works based on the Guardian Legend, there are also some incredible artworks of the heroine Miria from the game too, for image searchers to find. While Miria is no 2B, she is kind of like that darling female video game heroine you grow close to through your adventure with her, despite the fact that she only officially exists as 8-bit pixels within a minimalistic NES-level story. And that minimalism is what inspires your imagination like very few NES games did. My least favorite thing about the Guardian Legend is definitely its password system, which was terrible in 1989. It's as bad as Metroid's. It's the one reason I recommend emulating the game if that doesn't offend you. I can beat the game in a single playthrough myself, tapping my own memory memories of playing it numerous times, but most players will probably need to use that password system if they don't have access to save states. The North American box art for the game isn't bad and actually looks like something you'd see on Hollywood film advertising, but the Japanese box art for this game is just so amazing it belongs in a museum. It was done by science fiction artist Naoyuki Kato, who also did the art for things like Frank Herbert's Dune novel books 2 through 6 in Japan, the Gwyn Saga series, and Cultcept. The Guardian Legend released to middling reviews in 1989, but the game itself has definitely aged very well compared to most one-off Nintendo games that never became long-lasting video game series. In fact, I'd even argue that the game is more favorably talked about here in 2024 than it was in 1989 when it was compared to other games. I think that's due to how the game so successfully merged its hybrid gameplay elements for being made in 1989. Nowadays, many video games are hybrid games, but back then, seeing a game like The Guardian Legend was something special. Nintendo themselves published the game in Europe in 1990. The game still enjoys discussions in a lot of NES retro communities, with even Matt Bozone, the developer of Shantae, wanting to make a sequel to the game. Irem Software Engineering in Japan owns the IP and would probably be willing to license the Guardian Legend's IP to the right developer for the right price. The Guardian Legend is one of my favorite NES games. If a sequel or remake ever happened, it would definitely get my attention. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.